You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking currently. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump hit the swing states in the last days of the US presidential election as analysts debate a slate of last-minute and contradictory polls. As the race enters its last 48 hours, analysts argue that the final polls give a choose-your-own-adventure ending to an unprecedented election. Taiwan's defense ministry says it has spotted 35 Chinese military aircraft, including fighters and bombers, flying to the island's south on the way to exercises in the Pacific. A second day in a row, it has reported such activities. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar emphasized the transformation in India-Australia relations, attributing the progress to four key factors, while reflecting on the evolution of the bilateral partnership between the two nations, while addressing the Indian community in Brisbane, Australia. The United States and Israel will definitively receive a crushing response, Iran's supreme leader has said, following an Israeli attack on Iran a few weeks ago. The threat comes as Iran assesses whether and how to respond to Israel's attack last month. China's Shenzhou 18 crew have returned home after more than 6 months in space. Well, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are pushing their closing messages as they tour several swing states with around 40 hours to go before America decides its next president. Now, as Trump's campaign works to clear up his remarks about shooting the media, Kamala Harris dodged questions about her vote on a California crime measure. But in the last dash to the election finish line on Tuesday, Kamala Harris's team is cautiously optimistic about her chances of victory in what continues to be an extremely tight race. The polls in America as we speak suggest the race is still exceptionally close and more than 75 million people have already voted. We have reactions lined up from both the presidential nominees. Listen in.
So Michigan, 2 days to go. In one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and we have momentum. It is on our side. Can you feel it? And we have the momentum because our campaign is tapping into the ambitions, the aspirations, and the dreams of the American people, because we are optimistic and excited about what we can do together.
To our great sports fans, and I hope you're having a fantastic time. We're 2 days away from the most important election in the history of our country. We've got to save our country, and it needs saving. It's in very bad shape. The worst economic numbers in generations were just announced 2 days ago. We're losing jobs, we're losing everything, including viability. We're going to end up in a depression based on what's been happening. We've never seen anything like it, at least for the last 40 years. We have to straighten out our country, we have to close our borders, we have to lower our taxes, we have to get rid of inflation, and we're going to do it. Just remember, Kamala and her friends broke it. I'll fix it. Most important election in the history of our country. Go and vote.
And my colleague Gauri Trivedi joins us live at the moment from Pennsylvania. She's in Philadelphia, I'm told. Gauri, thanks so much for joining us at the moment. The violence in Butler, Pennsylvania has made this a tumultuous election, as many would argue, unlike any in living memory in the United States. But we hear Trump supporters remain bullish and confident. But are Kamala Harris supporters hopeful of raining on Trump's parade? What's the mood you've picked up on since you got there?
Parmeshwar, I'm indeed in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, the largest city of the state that is set to decide who will be the next president of the United States. 19 electoral college votes up for grabs, and it is Pennsylvania that will decide who crosses the 270 mark. Now, Philadelphia is a predominantly black city. 43% of the population here is black American. But that's just it. It is not the whole as far as Pennsylvania is concerned. 1 out of 10 voters in whole of Pennsylvania are black, but about half of them stay in Philadelphia. So as far as the Kamala Harris's specific identity in terms of reaching out and breaking the ground when it comes to black American voters, it is Philadelphia where it matters the most than whole of Pennsylvania. But some of the data that is coming in right now seems to indicate that within some of those Philadelphia counties and suburbs, even in the black American population, Republicans seem to have made inroads, and that is something that the Harris campaign would be very watchful of. As I said, half of Pennsylvania's black voters reside in this very city, and Harris's entire pitch, a lot of it has been about reaching out to the black American community. Already there are divisions within the black American community cut on gender lines and across college education. Most voters in Pennsylvania who do not have a 4-year college degree are voting for Trump. Secondly, black men, even those that we've spoken to, are not so sure about Harris's economic plan. They feel not enough has been told and not enough has been done in the last 4 years for her to get their precious vote. So it really comes down to the wire. And one important thing I want to say is that amongst all the studies that have been done in the last 6 months, Pennsylvania has been studied the most. In fact, over 110 studies have already taken place only and only on Pennsylvania, and not one has actually predicted a winner. And that just tells you just how close this race is.
Gauri, as always, thanks so much for joining us with that live update. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates in the last 40-hour stretch to the day that the next US president will be decided. But Indian Americans, meanwhile, they remain deeply connected to the Democratic Party, but have been less so since 2020, according to the results of a new Carnegie survey that was published. This is despite Kamala Harris being the Democratic nominee, with a chance to become the first person of Indian origin to enter the Oval Office. But to what extent does the Indian American vote matter in this election? Well, here's our report.
The United States is often called a nation of immigrants because it has the largest immigrant population in the world. Out of all immigrant groups in the country, Indian Americans are now the second largest, making them an important part of the presidential election process. The community has mostly favored the Democratic Party. According to a survey released by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in YouGov, 61% of registered Indian American voters plan to vote for Kamala Harris, and 31% intend to cast a ballot for Trump. Indian Americans have emerged as an important political actor thanks to the community's rapid demographic growth, the close margins in modern presidential elections, and the diaspora's remarkable professional success, according to the survey. So how can Indian Americans impact the US elections? Out of the more than 5 million Indian Americans present in the country, over 2.5 million are eligible to vote. It is the most politically active group among Asian Americans. To put it into perspective, Joe Biden defeated Trump by a margin of just over 12,000 votes in Georgia in 2020, making each vote valuable. Though Indian diaspora comprises a small share of overall electorate, both the parties have actively wooed Indian American voters. In a campaign advertisement, Harris explicitly invoked her mother as a brilliant brown woman with an accent. The Republican campaign has also turned the spotlight on the community due to the Indian roots of Usha Vance, the wife of Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. Indian Americans have been thrust into the limelight owing to the possibility that for the first time in the US's history, a candidate of Indian heritage could have the top job in the nation. The latest poll also shows a modest drift towards Trump and Republicans. The poll says the drift is driven by Indian American men, particularly younger men born in the US.
Thank you everyone.
A survey done earlier has said that the number of Indians who identify as Democrats slipped from 54% in 2020 to 47%. In the same time frame, those who identify as Republicans rose from 16% to 21%, further solidifying the notion that both parties look at this community with hope. Vishal Vivek for NDTV World.
And for further clarity, joining us live from New York, Professor of Political Science at Columbia University, Robert Shapiro. Thank you so much, Mr. Shapiro, for making time for us. Will Tuesday be a very good day for Republicans, courtesy battleground states? Or could Kamala Harris come out on top, sir? What have you been picking up on?
Well, what we've been picking up on is this is an extraordinarily close election. This is closer than a closer election than any that I could remember. The latest polls today just confirm it's getting closer. Kamala Harris had taken off after she had gotten the Democratic nomination, but the gap is closed, and this is really an extraordinarily exciting election coming up.
Well, some people around Trump, though, have said in recent weeks that they think that the former president will win 6 of the 7 key battleground states. And some say the South could get a little crazy if Donald Trump is not elected. Do you see any truth to this argument?
Well, there's no truth to his expectation that he should win. It really is extraordinarily close. And all of the top analysts and even ordinary people on the street see that this election is very close and that we don't know who the winner is going to be. The thing we do know is that Trump will engage in some kind of election denial if he's not the clear winner.
Right, that has been flagged actually by many geopolitical analysts and political watchers. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats' sneaky advantage has been that Senate Democrat campaigns have outspent Republicans with the one currency that both parties value the most, hard dollars. The Senate map favors Republicans, but sir, the Senate money favors Democrats. Aren't these competing dynamics likely to collide on election day?
Well, they are. I mean, the fundraising in this campaign has been extraordinary. Kamala Harris's fundraising has been extraordinary, and the Democratic Party has been raising a lot of money to attempt to maintain control of the Senate, which is something that's going to be extraordinarily difficult for them. But they're giving it a good try, and they're giving it a good try by spending money.
Well, the latest New York Times Siena poll suggests this race is a nail-biter. Thank you so much, Mr. Shapiro, for joining us. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates in the last 40-hour stretch to the deciding day. But nearly every swing state sits within the margin of error as per this new poll. And a new poll of Iowa, where Trump won in 2016 and 2020, indicates that Kamala Harris may have taken an unexpected lead there. In other crucial news, Taiwan's defense ministry has said it had spotted 35 Chinese military aircraft, including fighters and bombers, flying to the island's south on the way to exercises in the Pacific. A second day in a row it has reported such activities. China, which views democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory despite the strong objections of the government in Taipei, regularly sends its military in the skies and waters near the island, seeking to enforce its sovereignty claims. By the way, the United States is bound by law to provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself and its arms sales to Taipei, including a $2 billion missile system announced last month, infuriating Beijing. Well, to understand the latest moves, we have with us geopolitical analyst Don McLean-Gill. Thanks so much, Don. Always a pleasure to have a chat with you. Taiwan's defense ministry says it's detected about 37 Chinese military aircraft. This includes J-16 fighters, nuclear-capable H-6 bombers. Has China reacted yet? And what signals do you believe this latest move sends?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Parmeshwar. It's a great pleasure as always. So this is China's political warfare or cognitive warfare against Taiwan. So basically, Beijing is employing all means at its command, short of war, to achieve certain national objectives. And some of these sub-objectives include intimidating Taiwan's population and its political leadership. So we have seen a heightened level of incorporation of this political or cognitive warfare based on recent trends. A few weeks ago, China conducted Joint Sword 2024B, right? So while the maintenance of notional blockade scenarios was there, we could also see that the PRC military has been creeping closer and closer to mainland Taiwan, the main island of Taiwan, and its smaller outlying islands, right? So while this year's activities were modest in scale and duration, it represented Beijing's ongoing anger and frustration towards Taiwan's current president. So if we also look into October 31st, this was the first time that China had a dual aircraft carrier drill in the South China Sea to show, to flex its muscle regarding its consistent ongoing preparations in terms of Taiwan's blockade exercises, right? So what we can see is that this is part and parcel of China's willingness and China's intent to provoke Taiwan as much as it can short of war.
Right, Don, we're also hearing of opposing political parties wrangling over constitutional issues in Taiwan at a time when the threat of encirclement or invasion, as some argue, rises from neighboring China. What's happening politically at the moment? Is another political storm coming to Taiwan amid an escalating threat from China?
Well, there has always been a percentage of the population that continues to align with Beijing's narrative, and that is, in fact, one of the strongholds of Beijing, to try to exploit this particular advantage. But what we can see is that given the clear threat that China has been posing on Taiwan, this percentage, I believe, is decreasing as well, given, of course, the clear existential crisis that China is continuously bringing against Taiwan and its people. And this is, of course, something that is a clear provocation of the established order, which Taiwan has greatly benefited from. So in this regard, we could see that China is trying to exploit all means possible, as I mentioned earlier, to provoke as far as it could go in terms of eroding, the effective sovereignty that Taiwan's government continues to exercise. So this is, of course, part of its expansionist designs in the Western Pacific.
As always, Don, thanks so much for joining us on NDTV with your comments.
Thank you.
Let's switch our attention now. India, which is on the path of growth, wants to grow with the world. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has said, stressing that there is genuine goodwill and desire among nations to work with India. Dr. Jaishankar arrived in Brisbane on the first leg of his two-nation tour, which will also take him to Singapore, actually. And during this visit, Dr. Jaishankar will inaugurate India's 4th consulate in Australia in Brisbane. He will also co-chair the 15th Foreign Ministers Framework Dialogue with his Australian counterpart Penny Wong in Canberra. He will then deliver the keynote address at the inaugural session of the 2nd Raisina Down Under to be held in the Australian Parliament House. He is also scheduled to have interactions with Australian leadership, parliamentarians, members of the Indian diaspora, business community, media and think tanks. It's an action-packed visit for our External Affairs Minister, who on the second leg of the visit will also travel to Singapore for an official visit on the 8th of this month, during which he will address the 8th roundtable of ASEAN-India network of think tanks. Saying that India and China have made some progress in disengagement, Dr. Jaishankar has said this was a welcome move which opens up the possibility that other steps could happen. His remarks came a day after the government confirmed that verification patrolling has commenced on mutually agreed terms in Demchok and Debsang along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh. Listen in.
The fact is, there are very large number of Chinese troops deployed along the line of actual control who were not there before 2020, and we in turn have counter-deployed. And there are other aspects of the relationship which also got affected during this period. So clearly, we have to see after the disengagement what is the direction we go. But we do think the disengagement is a welcome step. It opens up the possibility that other steps could happen. The expectation after Prime Minister Modi met President Xi was that both the National Security Advisor and myself, we would meet our counterpart.
Well, as always, news and updates continue right after this very short break. Don't go anywhere. Back. After a group of pro-Khalistanis attacked the Hindu-Canadian devotees inside the Hindu Sabha temple in Brampton, Canadian MP Chandra Arya has condemned the violence and said that under the freedom of expression, extremists are getting a free pass in Canada. In fact, sharing a video of the protesters waving flags at the front entrance of the Hindu Sabha Mandir, Mr. Arya said that he started believing that there is a small grain of truth in some reports that have been covered. Peel Regional Police, meanwhile, are investigating the incident and said they were aware of the protest taking place in the northeast end of the city. In other news now, senior officials of the rival Palestinian groups Fatah and Hamas are meeting in Cairo to discuss forming a committee to manage Gaza's post-war governance, an Egyptian security source was quoted as saying by Egypt's local media. The talks are part of Egypt's broader mediation efforts to broker a ceasefire between Israel and militant group Hamas and to expand humanitarian access to the enclave. Let's get you a quick update as far as Spain is concerned now. Hundreds of people have heckled Spain's King Philippe and Queen Letizia, as well as the Prime Minister and the regional leader of Valencia, throwing mud and shouting "murderers" as the group attempted an official visit to one of the municipalities hardest hit by the deadly floods. The scenes playing out in Paiporta on Sunday laid bare the mounting sense of abandonment among the devastated areas and the lingering anger over why an alert urging residents not to leave home on Tuesday was sent after the floodwaters began surging. Much of the fury appeared to be directed at the elected officials as calls rang out for the resignation of Pedro Sanchez, the country's prime minister. In other news, the Shenzhou 18 crew consisting of 3 Chinese astronauts returned to Earth safely earlier today after completing a 6-month space station mission. The 3 astronauts, after staying in orbit for 192 days, were all in good health, and the Shenzhou 18 manned mission was a success, as has been announced. The Shenzhou 18 mission commander, by the way, has become the first Chinese astronaut with an accumulative spaceflight time of more than a year, setting a new record for the longest duration of stay in orbit by a Chinese astronaut. And finally, the armed standoff between India and China on the land dispute may have recently found an amicable solution, but there is a continuous and ancient tectonic tug-of-war between India and China, and here the Indian side is constantly losing land by sliding under the Tibetan. A tectonic struggle not even Prime Minister Modi nor Chinese President Xi Jinping can stop. Pallav Bagla has the lowdown.
There is a bigger geotectonic war which is happening uncontrolled. The Indian plate is sliding under the Eurasian plate on a constant basis. Behind me is the very sophisticated GPS station to measure altitude differences and the movement of land created by the 4th Paradigm Institute of the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. They have been researching how India is moving under the Tibetan plate. I last came to Hanle 25 years ago. Since then, where I am standing has moved by 85 centimeters northwards. And let's compare it. This is on the Tibetan plate. On the Indian plate, a similar place reading from Bangalore would have moved by 1.37 meters. Because of this tectonic movement, the Himalayas are constantly growing. Where I'm standing, since 25 years, has risen by almost 2.5 centimeters. A land dispute between India and China, but a geotectonic phenomena which cannot be controlled is certainly eating up India bit by bit. But experts tell me India will certainly not disappear even in a very long time. In the cold desert of Ladakh, at Hanle, where India has this sophisticated GPS instrument on top of this hill, with camera person Rohit Vishkarma, Pallav Bagla for NDTV.